Well, because I was president of HOPS, the Homophiles of Penn State, and because we were involved in some high-level lawsuits, I knew a lot of the activists in the state. And like I said, we invited them, Barbara Giddings to come speak. We invited Mark Siegel, Randy Forrester to come and speak at Penn State. For some reason, I was invited to a meeting in Harrisburg, and I can't recall the details of the invitation, but it was a meeting to deal with, to create an advisory committee or board on LGBT issues. And that's where I met Terry Delmuth, who was an aide to the governor, and Barry Kahn, who was an attorney with the Community Advocates Unit. And they really were driving forces behind the organization of the council. And so it was through my interactions at that meeting that I began to meet some of the people working at that state level.
Mm-hmm. What are your memories of your first meeting with Governor Schaap?
I met him in the governor's mansion. I was invited by Terry and Barry to meet with him, and it was for breakfast. So I remember we had breakfast together, and he was a very quiet-spoken man, intense man, and in our conversation it became clear that he was very progressive in all of his views, all of his political views. He formed the first Women's Commission about that time, and was amenable, and probably by then had already agreed to form the council, on the urging of Terry and Barry. So I guess I was rather tongue-tied, college student sitting with the governor. As chair, I was, of course, in a way responsible for all of the committees. And so a lot of my work was making sure that each committee was functioning appropriately and had resources, and reporting back to the whole council. At the time, I spent a good deal of energy making sure that the various state departments and agencies were represented on the council, so that we didn't have vacancies lasting too long, if someone retired or resigned. So I was usually, I might be called in by particular committees of the council if they felt they needed my intervention somehow in moving something along.
Did you get involved with the first lobby day that was held at the legislature?
Yeah. Yes, I was, not only helped organize it, of course, but I was there participating. Mm-hmm. And we often went, suggested people go in groups of 2 or 3 for a lot of reasons. One certainly was so that we could make sure to bring up all the issues we were concerned about. So my partner that day was Spencer Cox, who was the head of the ACLU in Philadelphia. And Spencer was unrelenting in his support of LGBT people. And he was used to dealing with legislators just from his position, and they were used to him. And so it was very interesting to see the level of discussion he had. And it was also interesting for me to see that no matter how rural or conservative the district, the members of the legislature we talked to or their aides were always very responsive and supportive. I think by that time there was, a lot of movement in the country and even in the state in support of various commissions and issues related to feminism and even gay rights. So we didn't surprise them. They weren't surprised by us, and they seemed to be very receptive in what we had to discuss. Yeah, there was a state senator, Nolan, I believe, who was avidly unreasonable when it came to this issue. And he kept trying to pass legislation allowing or forbidding the employment of gay people in jobs working with youth, especially in the education field. And he was just outspoken in his position. And he tried to pass and inspired other legislators to introduce bills, so that we constantly had 3 or 4 bills going through the House or Senate. But indeed, they didn't seem to have much behind them. Nolan at that time was, I think, majority leader in the Senate. And he and Shapp had many run-ins, because Shapp, of course, even in getting elected, sort of did so outside of the Democratic Party internal systems. He was sort of a maverick, and I don't know that he was actually the choice at the time to run for governor. I think the Democrats might have chosen someone else. So he wasn't one of the favorites. And so Nolan was already predisposed to be unhappy with Shapp. And as a very strong, outspoken supporter of the Catholic Church, very anti-abortion, he sort of naturally found us to be a government organization that he did not want to approve and could not approve. And so he would write legislation often to revoke the governor's executive order, or to create new legislation that would forbid hiring of people known to be gay in jobs working with children in particular. And so that remained a thorn in our side for a long time. Although he didn't get anywhere with his bills, except really to alienate the other legislators, because they found themselves getting lobbied both from our people and from the other side. And it put them in very uncomfortable positions to have to talk about these issues back in their hometowns, issues that they didn't really think were relevant, since there was nothing happening in the public that was generating all this legislation. It was just being self-generated from Nolan's office and from some of his allies. And so as a result, more and more pressure built so that he was voted out of his majority whip position, I believe, because he was devoting too much energy to this issue in particular, and it was becoming more and more difficult for his allies in the Democratic Party to have to declare themselves on this issue. It was one issue. The people were much happier just to turn away and not pay any attention to it. It was a no-win for them, in their view, no matter what they did. My interaction with the governor during my term as chair was most often at social events, either activities that they had at the governor's mansion, like some kind of special activity, put on by the Women's Commission, or simply by stopping in his office when I was in Harrisburg. And those were basically, most usually, just social interactions that we had. The substantial relationships in terms of policy or legislation, those kinds of conversations happened through his aides, primarily Terry Delmuth and Barry Ayers. And I was in communication with them sometimes daily, certainly weekly, on trying to move the different state agencies forward one way or another. Our goal at that time was to embed this issue as deeply as we could in every state agency. So we were always looking for opportunities to add language, to add our language into their contracts and into their policies. And we were pretty successful. We had, at one point, all of the state agencies were required to notify us of any discrimination complaints that were issued in their agencies around LGBT issues. And that had a major effect in terms of letting people know that this was a serious issue, that these issues had to be recorded and that reports had to be generated if these complaints came in. And so bureaucrats know that when you have to generate a report, that business is serious. And so I think it had a lot of impact in that I think it made, sort of said, gave notice that these kind of complaints were not welcome and that actions would be taken to remedy them. And so I think in some sense it really helped change the whole attitude of the bureaucracy. This was now becoming an issue that demanded attention, the same way that the Governor's Commission for Women, his Latino Council, and other programs that he supported. He was very much outstanding supporter of equal rights and civil rights for all minorities. He was just probably one of the most activist governors in the country in that way. And it became clear to people that LGBT people were to be included under that umbrella.